My name is Alex Carter, and I've just turned 34. For 10 years, I was married to Olivia Turner, one of the most driven and successful people I've ever known. She built Turner Strategies from the ground up, turning a small consulting firm into a powerhouse global marketing agency worth over $300 million. People admired her, looked up to her, and I was proud to be by her side, watching her rise. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being her partner and became just another cog in her machine. At first, I believed in her passion. I admired it, in fact. She was a force of nature, obsessed with her work, with building something important. It felt like I was contributing, supporting her every step of the way. But as time passed, something changed. The longer she worked to build her empire, the further I faded into the background. She was always consumed by meetings, deadlines, and decisions that took priority over everything, including our marriage. I became more like a fixture in her life, someone who showed up to dinners and events but wasn't really there. The worst part, I let it happen. I kept telling myself that her success was everything, that she was building something important, and that I just needed to be patient. But I was slowly losing myself. I went from being her equal, her partner, to being nothing more than a backdrop to her life. I started to realize that, in her eyes, I was just another item on her list. She had her career, her clients, her goals, and then there was me. Someone who was supposed to understand why she couldn't make time for me. At first, I tried to voice my frustrations. I'd tell her I missed her, that I wanted to talk or spend time together, but I was met with the same response. "I'm busy, Alex. You know how important this is." Her words, while meant to be reassuring, only reminded me that I didn't matter. There was always something more important than me, and I was tired of pretending it didn't hurt. I had started to believe that maybe it was me. Maybe I wasn't trying hard enough, or maybe I wasn't understanding enough. So I kept waiting for her to change, for things to go back to how they were when we first met. But nothing changed. In fact, it only got worse. Dinner conversations turned into silent affairs where she was glued to her phone or laptop, and I was left to pick at my food in silence. We hadn't really talked in months. Like, really talked. No real connection, no real exchange of thoughts or feelings. It was like we were roommates, but even that felt like a stretch. I would look at her sometimes and wonder if she even saw me anymore, or if I was just another part of her life that didn't really matter. One Friday evening, after another long, quiet dinner where I tried to get her attention, she said it. She looked up from her laptop for just a moment, eyes cold as she said, "You can't expect me to drop everything for you every time you want attention, Alex." It felt like a slap in the face. I hadn't even asked for much, just a real conversation, but even that seemed like an impossible request. I tried to explain, but she shut me down before I could even finish my thought. Her eyes barely left the screen as she told me, "I have a company to run, Alex. Maybe you should find something to occupy your time instead of complaining about mine." That was it, the moment everything shifted. That was the moment I knew I couldn't keep doing this anymore. I was done being invisible in my own marriage. So I stood up from the table, packed my things, and walked out. I didn't know where I was going or what I would do next, but I couldn't stay another minute in a relationship that had made me feel like I didn't matter. The next morning, I was in Portland, starting over. Portland felt like a breath of fresh air. After years of living in Olivia's shadow, drowning in her world of deadlines and corporate pressures, this city was a complete contrast. The pace was slower, the air was different, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. I didn't have a plan at first, didn't know exactly where I'd end up, but that didn't matter. The feeling of freedom, the freedom to just exist without constantly measuring up to someone else's expectations, was enough to make everything else feel secondary. I found a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood, far from the glitzy offices and the high-stakes world I had left behind. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, and that felt like everything. I could walk to the local coffee shop, sit by the window with a book, and not worry about checking my email every 5 minutes. I could breathe without the weight of Olivia's expectations on my shoulders, without the incessant pressure to be someone I wasn't. I didn't have to pretend anymore, and I didn't have to convince myself that my worth depended on being the supportive husband to her empire. The job hunt was tough at first, especially when my mind kept drifting back to the life I had known. It felt strange applying for jobs, updating my resume, and actually considering opportunities that didn't revolve around Olivia's needs. But slowly, I began to remember who I was before I became so entangled in her world. I found a marketing director role at a startup called Nova Reach, a company that, unlike Olivia's, actually valued work-life balance. They didn't need me to be available 24/7. They valued my experience, respected my opinion, and most importantly, they treated me like a person. I didn't have to compete for attention in endless meetings or justify why I deserved a seat at the table. It was a refreshing change. As I settled into my new life in Portland, I found something I hadn't realized I had lost: peace. The constant noise in my head quieted. I wasn't worried about Olivia's next move or trying to second-guess her emotions. I could focus on my own happiness, on my own goals. I started reconnecting with old friends, spending weekends outdoors, and doing things that reminded me of who I was before the years of being swallowed by Olivia's world. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was living for myself. Then, about a month into this new life, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. At first, I thought nothing of it, but something inside me hesitated before answering. When I picked up, the voice on the other end made my blood run cold. "Alex, it's Lily. We need to talk about Olivia." I froze, unable to speak for a moment. Lily? The name didn't immediately register, but then it hit me. Olivia had mentioned someone by that name, someone she'd been working with. I tried to steady my breath, but the tightness in my chest made it hard. "What about her?" I finally managed to say. "I've been seeing Olivia for the past 6 months, Lily said, her voice tentative but firm. "She told me you two were separated, that you were working through some things, but I just found out that isn't true. You guys are still married." I sat back in my chair, feeling the world spin around me. My stomach dropped. Olivia, the woman I had sacrificed everything for, had been lying to both of us. She wasn't just emotionally absent. She had been actively deceiving me, keeping me in the dark while she juggled a secret relationship. The betrayal was sharp, like a knife cutting through the remnants of what I thought we had. But there was something else that hit me too. Relief. Relief that I wasn't the one who had been imagining things. Relief that the truth was finally out in the open, even if it hurt. Lily explained how she had been kept in the dark about our marriage, how Olivia had manipulated both of us, using her work as a shield and lying about her true feelings. It was a punch to the gut, but at the same time, it confirmed what I had always feared: that I was just a placeholder in Olivia's life, someone who was expected to fit into whatever mold she needed at the time. But hearing it from Lily, someone outside of our relationship, made the truth undeniable. I spent the next few hours in a daze. I didn't know what to do with this new information, but I knew it changed everything. I didn't want her money, her apologies, or her lies. I wanted to be free from her manipulation. So I called my lawyer. I told him I wanted a divorce. I didn't care about the financial settlement. I wasn't looking for a payday. I was looking for honesty. It was time to take back control of my life and stop letting Olivia define who I was. The days after that call were a blur of paperwork, legal battles, and painful conversations. Olivia tried to call me, of course. She left message after message, but I ignored them all. I couldn't face her lies anymore. Finally, I picked up the phone. "Olivia," I said, my voice calm but resolute. "I'm done. I've been done for a while now." She didn't understand. She offered money, tons of it, to make the divorce go away quietly, to keep things from becoming public. But I didn't want her money. I wanted my life back, and I wanted the truth to be known. When the divorce was finalized, I felt lighter than I had in years. No more pretending. No more being invisible. I was free. The months after the divorce were a blur of new beginnings. At first, I felt like I was walking through life in a daze, unsure of where I was headed, but somehow relieved that the heavy weight of Olivia's expectations had finally lifted. The freedom was exhilarating, but at the same time, it was intimidating. I'd spent so much time defining myself through Olivia's lens, her success, her needs, her world, that I had to learn what it meant to define myself on my own. Work at Nova Reach had been a blessing. I had never imagined a company could actually value work-life balance the way they did. I was finally treated like a person, not just a tool to push the company's goals forward. The hours were reasonable, and the people respected each other's time outside of the office. No one expected me to sacrifice my personal life for the job. It was a stark contrast to the workaholic culture I'd come from, and at first, it felt strange, like I was almost doing something wrong by not staying late or checking my phone every minute. But over time, I started to appreciate it. I had time to read again, to meet friends for coffee, and to walk around the city without feeling like I was letting someone down. My work was well received, and my colleagues respected me. After 6 months, I was promoted to senior marketing strategist. It wasn't just the title or the salary increase that made me feel good. It was the sense of being valued for my own ideas, my own skills. No more waiting for approval from someone who only saw me as an accessory to her life. It felt like a fresh start, like I was becoming the person I had always been meant to be, before I lost myself in Olivia's world. But as much as I was enjoying the peace and progress, there was still something missing. It wasn't just about work or success. I had spent so long focusing on Olivia and the life we had, or rather, the life I thought we had, that I had forgotten what it meant to connect with someone, to be close without the weight of emotional manipulation. It took me a while to realize that what I missed wasn't just the idea of Olivia, but the emotional connection I had been craving for so long. Then I met Sophie. It happened casually at a networking event one Saturday afternoon. She was easy to talk to, funny, grounded. She wasn't impressed by my job title or the companies I had worked for. She actually seemed more interested in hearing about my life outside of work, about my hobbies, my interests, what I did when I wasn't working. It was a refreshing change. She wasn't expecting anything from me, and that was the first time in a long time that I felt like I could just be myself. We started seeing each other regularly, and I found myself looking forward to every moment. Sophie was genuine, kind, and had a way of making me feel seen in a way I hadn't realized I missed. The connection between us was easy, without the strain or games I had come to associate with relationships. There were no manipulations, no emotional baggage weighing us down. It was just two people getting to know each other, enjoying each other's company without any pretensions. But just when I thought things couldn't get more complicated, Olivia reached out again. I'd been expecting it, but that didn't make it any easier to face. It had been months since the divorce, and I had started to move on with my life. But there she was again, sending me a message late one evening. "Alex, we need to talk. It's important." My heart sank, but I didn't immediately respond. I didn't need to, not anymore. Sophie was sitting across from me in the living room, the soft light from the table lamp casting a warm glow on her face. She looked up when my phone buzzed again, the text from Olivia still staring up at me from the screen. "Are you going to answer that?" Sophie asked, her tone curious but not judgmental. I thought for a moment. Olivia had always assumed I'd come crawling back, that I'd regret leaving, that I needed her more than I let on. But here I was, sitting next to someone who actually saw me, not for what I could provide, but for who I was. I was living a life I had built for myself, one where I was respected, valued, and seen. I didn't need Olivia's validation anymore. "No," I said, turning my phone face down on the table. I looked at Sophie and smiled. "I think I'm exactly where I need to be." The next few months were a blur of happiness, growth, and success. My work at Nova Reach flourished, and my relationship with Sophie grew stronger. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living for myself, no longer defined by someone else's expectations or emotional needs. Olivia's calls and messages became less frequent, and eventually they stopped altogether. It was as if she had finally realized that I wasn't going to come back, that I had moved on, and in doing so, I had reclaimed my life. The life I had now, the one I was building for myself, felt like everything I had been missing all along. I had peace. I had independence. And for the first time in my life, I knew my worth wasn't tied to anyone else. It was mine, and no one could take that from me. Life continued to unfold in a way I hadn't anticipated. Looking back, I could see the transformation I had undergone, from a man who had lived in the shadow of someone else's ambitions to someone who had finally stepped into his own light. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. and that was all I needed. I had a job that respected my time, a partner who actually cared about me, and a sense of self that no longer depended on external validation. Sophie and I had been seeing each other for almost 6 months now. It was easy with her. No games, no emotional manipulation, just two people getting to know each other in the most genuine way. We spent weekends hiking, going to farmers markets, or just staying in and cooking dinner together. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could relax without worrying about the next big deal or the next crisis in someone else's life. Sophie didn't expect me to be anything other than myself. She didn't want to change me, didn't need me to fit into a mold. She liked me for who I was, and for once, I liked myself for the same reason. But despite everything I had gained, there were still moments when the past crept in. Olivia was still there, lingering in my thoughts. It was hard to fully let go, to completely disconnect from a woman I had spent a decade of my life with. There were nights when I'd find myself thinking about the things we once had, about how we used to be. But those thoughts didn't linger long. The reality of our marriage, the manipulation, the emotional neglect, was more than enough to remind me why I had left. I wasn't just walking away from her. I was walking away from a version of myself that I didn't even recognize anymore. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I came home to find Sophie sitting on the couch, her laptop open, but her attention focused on me as soon as I walked in. "Hey," she greeted me with a warm smile, the kind of smile that made everything feel like it would be okay. "How was your day?" I sank into the chair beside her, rubbing my eyes. Exhausting, honestly. Long meetings, a dozen emails, and a report I had to finish on top of it all. But it's done now. Sophie set her laptop aside and turned toward me, her expression softening. "I'm sorry it was a tough day. Want to talk about it?" I thought for a moment, considering the weight of everything on my shoulders. But I shook my head. "It's not work. I've been thinking a lot about, well, everything about Olivia." Sophie didn't look surprised. We had talked about my past before, about my marriage and everything that had led to its collapse. But I could tell she knew this was different. This was something deeper. "She's still trying to reach out, isn't she?" Sophie asked gently. I nodded, feeling the familiar bitterness rise in my chest. "Yeah, she sent me a message today. It's the first time in a while. She says we need to talk, like there's something left to say." Sophie's eyes softened with understanding, but I could see the protective edge in them too. "Are you going to respond?" I sighed, leaning back into the couch. "No, I don't think I need to. But it's hard, you know? There are moments when I wonder what could have been if things had turned out differently. But every time I start to think that way, I remember how hollow it all felt. She never really saw me, Sophie. She only saw what I could do for her, how I could support her, and I kept trying to fill that role because I thought that was enough." Sophie reached over and placed her hand on mine, a small gesture, but one that spoke volumes. "You are enough, Alex. You always were." I smiled at her, grateful for her reassurance, for her steady presence in my life. Sophie wasn't trying to fix me. She wasn't trying to be my savior. She just was. And for the first time, I realized that was exactly what I needed. Someone who didn't need to change me, but accepted me as I was. Later that night, as I lay in bed next to Sophie, I thought about the message Olivia had sent me. I thought about how she had always been able to manipulate the narrative, how she had convinced herself and me that we were fine, even when we weren't. She was still trying to rewrite the story of our marriage, to make herself the victim. But I wasn't going to be part of that story anymore. I had my own narrative now, one that was mine to shape. I wasn't the husband who had to stay in the background, nor was I the man who had to be perfect in someone else's eyes. I was Alex Carter, the man who had rebuilt his life from the ground up, who had found peace after years of emotional turmoil. And for the first time in a long time, I was exactly where I needed to be. The next morning, Olivia's message was still sitting in my inbox, but I didn't feel the need to read it. I deleted it without a second thought. That was the old me, the one who cared too much about her approval. The new me didn't need any part of that. I had found something better. I had found myself. And that was all that mattered. The weeks that followed felt like a culmination of everything I had been working toward. I had found peace, and more than that, I had found strength in myself that I didn't know existed. My relationship with Sophie was growing, but it was more than just a relationship. It was a reflection of everything I had learned about myself. Sophie was different from anyone I had known before. There was no pressure, no hidden agendas, no need for validation. She made me feel seen for who I was, not for what I could give her or what role I played in her life. Work was equally fulfilling. Nova Reach was the kind of place I had never thought I'd find. People treated each other like equals, valued each other's opinions, and supported one another in a way that was both professional and personal. For the first time in a long time, I was no longer trying to prove myself. I was simply doing my best and getting recognized for it. I had a steady, fulfilling rhythm in both my personal and professional life. But even with all this newness and the positive changes, there were moments of doubt. I'd sometimes catch myself slipping into old patterns of thinking. I'd think about Olivia and wonder if she had changed, if she had learned anything from our time apart. I'd get these fleeting thoughts, questioning whether I had made the right decision by walking away. But each time, I reminded myself of the truth. I had been invisible for too long in that marriage. I had been a supporting character in someone else's story, and it wasn't until I walked away that I found the courage to write my own. One evening, after a particularly rewarding day at work, Sophie and I were sitting on the balcony of my apartment, enjoying a quiet evening. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the city, and I found myself feeling more at ease than I had in years. "Sophie," I said, breaking the silence between us, "I've been thinking a lot about everything, about how much has changed in such a short time." She looked at me with those eyes that always seemed to see straight through to my soul, and I felt safe in her gaze. "What's on your mind?" I think I've finally come to terms with it all, with the past, with Olivia. I realize I've spent so much of my life trying to fit into her world, trying to make it work, that I forgot what it meant to be myself. But now I get it. I get why I had to leave. Sophie smiled softly, her fingers brushing over mine. "I'm glad you came to that realization, Alex. You're the one who needs to decide what's best for you, not anyone else. And I'm proud of you for choosing yourself." Her words settled deep within me, like a warmth that I had never truly known before. Sophie wasn't just supportive, she was a reminder of everything I had gained. She wasn't in my life to fix me or fill a void. She was simply there because we both wanted to be, and that made all the difference. As the days passed, Olivia's presence in my life grew more distant, and it was clear she wasn't coming back. She had stopped reaching out, and I stopped feeling the pull to answer her messages. The more time went on, the more I realized that the person I had been in that marriage was no longer someone I recognized. I was no longer that man, the one who would have sacrificed everything to make Olivia happy, the one who would have bent over backwards to keep her satisfied, even at the cost of his own happiness. I had found something better, a life where I was the one who mattered, a life where I was valued for who I was, not what I could provide. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. And in that moment, as Sophie leaned in to kiss me, I realized just how far I had come. I wasn't looking back. I wasn't waiting for Olivia or anyone else to validate me. I had built this life, and I was going to live it on my own terms. The changes in my life didn't stop with the new job, the new city, or even the relationship with Sophie. They were far deeper than that. It wasn't just about external circumstances. It was about how I felt about myself. I had gone from being a man who was constantly seeking validation and living in someone else's shadow to a man who finally understood his own worth. Every morning when I woke up, I didn't feel the weight of expectations pressing down on me anymore. I felt light, free. I was able to take a step back and really appreciate what I had built, not just the job or the relationship, but the person I had become, and it felt like a true awakening. For so long, I had measured myself by someone else's standards. Olivia's success, her ambition, her world. Now, I was learning to define success on my own terms. It was a quiet kind of triumph, not loud or flashy, but it was real. Sophie and I were continuing to grow together, but it wasn't the same as the kind of relationship I had with Olivia. Sophie never made me feel small, never made me feel like I was just another step in her ascent to the top. She was grounded, kind, and loved me not for what I could do for her, but for who I was. And that was a revelation. We spent more time together, traveling, trying new restaurants, and most importantly, talking. Really talking. It wasn't forced or one-sided. It was easy. It felt right. But I couldn't ignore the fact that Olivia had been trying to reach me again. She hadn't given up. Her calls and texts had become more frequent over the past few weeks, but I had learned not to respond. Each time, it felt like a test. Would I give in? Would I let her back into my life? Would I let her continue to control the narrative of our past? And each time, I reminded myself that I wasn't that man anymore. I had walked away for a reason, and I wasn't going to be pulled back into that world. One day, after a long week of work, Sophie and I were having dinner at a little bistro we both loved. The kind of place where the lighting was soft, the food was simple but delicious, and the atmosphere felt warm and welcoming. As we ate, Sophie casually mentioned something that made my chest tighten. "Have you thought about talking to Olivia?" she asked, her voice gentle but laced with concern. I looked up, surprised by the question. "About what?" About everything. About how things ended. You've told me a little bit about your past with her, but I'm wondering if, maybe, you need closure." I set my fork down, considering her words. I hadn't really thought about closure. I had moved on, or so I thought. But Sophie had a point. I wasn't running from the past anymore, but there was still a part of me that had never fully confronted it. "I don't know," I said slowly. "Maybe, but I don't think I need closure from her anymore. I think I already have it. I've accepted what happened, and I'm not looking for answers that will just hurt me again. I don't need her in my life to move forward." Sophie smiled softly, squeezing my hand across the table. "You've done the hard work, Alex. You've walked away. You've healed. And now you're living the life you deserve." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I didn't need Olivia's closure. I didn't need anything from her anymore. I had already found everything I needed within myself. I was whole. As we finished dinner and walked out into the crisp evening air, I felt lighter than I ever had before. I knew that I had made the right choice. And more than that, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. I wasn't looking back. I wasn't waiting for any final chapters from the past to be written. My story was already unfolding, and it was mine to write. The weeks that followed felt like an extension of everything I had worked toward. An unhurried flow of days where I didn't have to fight to feel important or validated. I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone anymore. Every morning, I woke up to a life I had built for myself, one that was mine and mine alone. There was no need to look over my shoulder, no need to wonder if I was making the right choice. The choice had already been made when I left Olivia, when I stopped allowing my worth to be dictated by someone else's expectations. Sophie and I continued to grow together, and our relationship was becoming more comfortable, more natural. We didn't rush into anything. Instead, we let things unfold as they were meant to. I had learned the importance of allowing a relationship to grow organically without forcing anything, and I was grateful for how effortlessly Sophie and I worked together. She was the calm to my storm, the grounding force in a world that had once felt overwhelmingly chaotic. With her, I felt seen, valued, and most importantly, at peace. But even as things with Sophie continued to deepen, there were moments when the past still crept in. I'd catch myself thinking about Olivia, wondering how she was doing, whether she had really changed, or if she had just moved on to the next chapter of her life without a second thought. It wasn't so much about missing her. It was more about wondering if I had done the right thing. Was leaving her truly the best decision? Did I make a mistake in walking away? I shook off those thoughts whenever they surfaced. I had already done the hard work. I had already walked away, had already fought to build a life that was healthy and whole. I couldn't keep second-guessing myself. I had left for a reason, and that reason had never been more clear than it was now. Olivia had always needed to be the center of attention, to control every aspect of our lives, to make sure I fit into whatever role she needed me to play. I wasn't that person anymore. I had learned to live for myself, and that was a gift I couldn't take for granted. Then one day, Olivia reached out again. This time, it wasn't just a text. It was a voicemail, her voice tinged with an unfamiliar vulnerability. "Alex," she said, her tone softer than I had ever heard it. "I know it's been a while, but I think we need to talk. I've made a lot of mistakes, and I owe you an apology. Can we meet? Just to talk. For closure, if nothing else. The voicemail sat in my inbox for hours, and I felt the familiar rush of anxiety stir in my chest. I had moved on from Olivia, but there was still a part of me that wasn't sure what to do with this. Closure? Was that something I even needed from her anymore? I had spent so many years chasing after her approval, waiting for her to acknowledge my worth. But I was no longer that man. I had already let go of her, of the idea of who I thought she was. I didn't need anything from her anymore. I played the voicemail again, trying to gauge how I felt. In the end, I knew the answer. I didn't need to meet with her. I didn't need to revisit the past. I had already forgiven her in my heart, but I didn't need her apology to move forward. That night, I deleted the message without listening to it again. Sophie and I made dinner together, laughed, and shared stories about our days. It felt so natural, so right. I had everything I needed right here, right now. I didn't need to chase after anything from the past. The life I had now was the one I had built, one where I didn't have to compromise my happiness for anyone else. I was free, truly free, and nothing from the past could take that away. As I sat down to dinner with Sophie, I realized that closure wasn't something Olivia could give me. It was something I had already given to myself. The days following Olivia's voicemail passed quietly, without much fanfare. I had made peace with the past, and I wasn't looking for any final chapters to be written. The closure I had sought for so long had already been achieved when I walked away. I had learned the hard way that some things couldn't be fixed or undone. It wasn't about forgiveness anymore. It was about freedom. Freedom from the person I had been when I was with her. The man who had sacrificed his own identity to fit into a life that wasn't his own. As the weeks turned into months, I continued to find solace in the life I was building with Sophie. It wasn't about grand gestures or the fireworks that Hollywood likes to show us. It was about the quiet moments. Long conversations over breakfast, shared walks through the city, laughing at silly jokes, and being there for each other without conditions. Sophie never asked me to be someone I wasn't, and in that, I found something I had never had in my marriage to Olivia: peace. Work at Nova Reach was flourishing. I was growing into my role, not just as a senior strategist, but as a leader within the company. It wasn't just about the projects or the success, it was the fact that I felt seen. I had my own voice now, my own place. I wasn't competing with anyone or trying to prove myself. I was just doing my best, and that felt enough. But as much as I had moved on, the remnants of the past still lingered from time to time. Olivia's voice, her expectations, the constant need to please, those things didn't just disappear overnight. There were moments, usually in the quiet of the evening, when the thought of her would creep into my mind, and I'd wonder how she was, if she had changed. Would she ever be different? Would she ever truly understand what she had done? But then I reminded myself that it didn't matter anymore. It wasn't my job to fix her. She wasn't my responsibility. I had spent so long trying to understand her, trying to make things work, that I had lost sight of the most important person in my life: myself. One night, Sophie and I were sitting on the balcony of my apartment, enjoying the warmth of the summer evening. The sun was setting in a brilliant wash of colors, and we were quiet for a moment, just taking it all in. It was one of those rare moments where the world seemed to stop spinning and everything was perfectly still. "Sophie," I said, breaking the silence, "I've been thinking a lot lately." She turned to me, her eyes soft with curiosity. "About what?" "About how far I've come. About everything. I think I finally get it. I finally understand what it means to truly live for myself." She smiled, her gaze warm. "I'm glad you feel that way, Alex. You deserve it." I looked at her, the woman who had quietly become such a pivotal part of my life. In a way, Sophie represented everything I had worked toward: a life where I was free, where I was respected, and where I could finally be myself without fear of judgment. "I spent so long measuring my worth by other people's standards," I continued, my voice softer now. "And in doing that, I lost myself. But I'm not doing that anymore. I'm living for me. And that feels like the biggest gift I could have given myself." Sophie reached out and took my hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "You're not alone anymore, Alex. You've built a life you deserve, and I'm so proud of you." In that moment, I realized that everything I had been through, the pain, the loss, the heartache, had all led me to this point. It wasn't a destination, but a journey. And I was finally living a life where I was the one in control, the one who decided what mattered. I wasn't waiting for anyone's approval anymore. I wasn't waiting for anything or anyone to fix me. I had already done that. And now I was free. In life, it's essential to define your worth by your own standards, not by the expectations of others. Don't lose yourself trying to fit into someone else's vision of who you should be. Prioritize your own happiness and well-being, even if it means stepping away from toxic relationships or environments. Don't be afraid to walk away from things that no longer serve you, whether it's a job, a person, or a mindset. True growth comes when you choose yourself, reclaim your identity, and embrace the freedom to live authentically. You deserve peace, respect, and a life built on your terms.